Okay. Wait, let's see. I'm going to do one other thing here, which is, no, there we go. Okay. Hi, I'm Diana Larson, and I am with the Agile Fluency project, so that's what I'm going to be here talking about today. If you are unfamiliar with my work, I mean, a lot of people are. Some people are shocked at that. I'm not anymore. Um, if you've read the book Agile Retrospectives, or the book about liftoff, about starting teams, or um, uh, 5 rules for accelerated learning. Those are all contributions I've made over the years to the Agile community. I joined the community before it was called Agile in the late 90s. I had the good fortune to meet some folks who were already doing work in the XP space, and then I met some folks in the Scrum space, and very attracted out of that. I had been doing work process redesign, so very similar work, but not as focused just in the software world as they were. And we found we had a lot of things in common. And so I've been part of the Agile movement ever since. I served on the Agile Alliance board for 7 years, and 3 of those as board chair. And so I've been knocking around this space for a while, and I definitely have some opinions. In 2012, James Shore and I uh, published on, actually Martin Fowler published it for us. We wrote an article and he published it called Agile Fluency, about the Agile Fluency model. And we thought we were done. We published the article, we'd done a lot of research to, and kind of crowdsourced feedback on what we had learned. And we had gotten it to a place where we felt pretty confident in it, and we published it in 2012, and we thought we were done. And he went off and he did some other things, and I went off and I was working on the liftoff book, and and we just kind of left it there. And then we started hearing about people who were using the model, and they started telling us about some of the ways that they were using it. You know, you go to a conference or something and somebody would come up and want to talk to us about it. And then we started getting folks asking us about, well, so how is it you actually apply this model? How do you actually implement this in your organization? And some of those were our clients. And so we started developing some sort of extra materials that went along with the model. And by mid 2015, it became clear to us that this needed to be a business. And so that's when we formed the Agile Fluency project. And so that's where I'm working today. I've as you can tell, I'm an older person. I sometimes joke that, you know, many folks go into retirement and they, you know, start their golfing or they get a boat or whatever. And I just have this Agile Fluency project startup. So it's my retirement project. So I want to tell you a little bit about it. You know, I ask that people have the opportunity to watch the video that's on our website or read the ebook. And I know that some of you have done that and some of you didn't get a chance to. So I'm going to do a quick overview of what, you know, the kind of the behind the scenes of the Agile Fluency model, so it becomes something more than just a phrase for you. And then we'll transition into an Ask Me Anything. Anything you want to know about Agile Fluency, how it works, you know, how we apply it, any of those kinds of things. And then also pretty much actually anything else about Agile you'd like me to comment on. Because I'm pretty comfortable in that space at this point after 20 years. If I don't know it now, I'm not going to learn it, right? Even though I'm always learning new things. So I'm going to start sharing. So we have something that we call the Agile Fluency Suite. now because of all those requests. And the first part of the Agile Fluency Suite is the model. And I'm going to make this as big as I can. Here, there we go. So we have the model, which is this central kind of vertical column here. And it's really arranged according to usage at this point. It's not, the first thing I want to say is it's not a maturity model. We often use the metaphor that this swooping part through here is actually a ride on a bus. Every transportation system in a city, anywhere, almost, if it's of any size, it goes through various bus zones, transportation zones in the city. And in order to get from one, in order to get from your apartment downtown to the IKEA big box store in the suburbs, you probably have to go through 3 or 4 or even 5 different bus zones to get there. But the thing is, if you're don't want to go to IKEA in the suburbs, but you just want to go to that other little neighborhood that has the cool restaurants that you want to eat at tonight, well, you're going to get off the bus by the restaurants. You're not going to go all the way to IKEA, right? So we think of this model as something like that. And the idea is to figure out where you want to go and then get off the bus and do what you need to do to develop the fluency you need for that zone. The model describes team behaviors, and we have come to believe through our many years of practice that teams are a fractal expression of the overall organizational system. So by looking at the behaviors that are going on in a number of teams, you learn a lot about what that system culture is, what its policies are, what its procedures are, what it enables and what it hinders, and all of those kinds of things. So very quickly through the model starts with pre-Agile. We don't have a lot of description here because that's not really the part that we were interested in. But pre-Agile are those folks who haven't made nothing wrong with being in pre-Agile. It's just those folks who have not yet made the decision that they would benefit by a different way of working. So they are probably still using, they may still be using some kind of phased development. They might have moved away from that. They may be doing some ad hoc process that they've invented at local in their organization. But mostly the people are working as individual contributors. And the role of the manager is why does this say sharing paused? Bring my shared window to the front. Huh. So you're not seeing that. I'm going to share again.
We were seeing the model. If you changed off the...
Is that what you wanted? Were you seeing that before?
Yes, we're seeing that.
Yeah, I was getting a weird message. Anyway, so in pre-Agile, the managers are tasking out the work. People work on the work. They primarily working on it either by their preference for sort of technical coolness that things they like to work on, their areas of it, the things that are in a particular language, or they may be getting their tasks based on the components that they are working on, or those kinds of things. And then at some point, it all gets integrated, and if it works, great. Maybe pre-Agile is exactly what your organization needs. But if it doesn't work and people are frustrated and feeling like their projects and their products, their product development process is not being successful, then maybe they need Agile. And so then we begin to look beyond that. And what we have seen is really the most fundamental. It's not always the first thing that people tackle, but it is the kind of the most fundamental baseline is what we call the focusing zone. And it is that shift in three ways. We are shifting from the idea of working as individual contributors to working as a part of a collaborative team. So that we call that a team culture shift. But we're also shifting our way of working in such a way that the business has more transparency into what's going on. They can see a work backlog, they can see incremental progress if we're working in sprints, or even they can look at the cycle time and see how the team is doing. So that becomes more transparent and more visible from an organizational perspective. And the team stops working in terms of what's cool and begins working in terms of what is going to provide the most value, both to the customer and to the business. And because they're working in these smaller chunks and not just working on the whole thing and then trying to put it together, because they're working in smaller chunks, the business has the opportunity to maybe redirect the teams if they get new information about what the marketplace needs, what the customer needs, so on. So that's the focusing zone. And the way this particular model card works is over here we talk about, so if the team isn't, you know, fully fluent and doesn't have full fluent proficiency in this focusing zone, here are the kinds of things that a leadership would maybe need to invest in to enable those teams. And then also we have some ideas about pretty much how long does it take to get to fully fluent proficiency if you go all in and really focus on it. And of course, it depends on where you start from. So we've given a range. For a lot of organizations, a surprising number of organizations, this is the zone they want. And I particularly teams that are building short-term projects, short-lived projects, maybe marketing websites or things of that ilk, or things that are serving, or that are teams that are serving sometimes internal infrastructure. They're building internal services. They're not doing a product for sale in the marketplace. Sometimes focusing is exactly what those organizations want, and they see it as a huge improvement over what they've gotten before. But that's not enough for everybody. And so if that's not enough, then you just keep driving that bus. You go through focusing, you go through that zone, and you pick up those skills, but then you may also need to drive the bus to the delivering zone. And here we look at business benefits like being able to release at will, or get a more frequent capture of value by having feature complete, feature by feature that can be released to the customer base. And also we see things that have gotten that are getting in the way early, and we can fix them while they're small. So we may even be delivering pretty much no defect or very low defect products into the marketplace. And in order to do that, we need to upgrade our team professional skills. So before we were looking on our team collaborative skills, but now we're talking about our professional skills. So extreme programming kinds of things, DevOps, maybe UX, if that's an important part of the product. And the investments here that the organization needs to make is patience through the maybe dip in productivity while the team is learning to do TDD or learning continuous integration or something like that. And they need more training and mentoring in those skills. Then, and for, I would say, 70 to 80% of the organizations we talk to, the teams they want, the team behaviors they want, the team outcomes they want is somewhere in these two zones. But that's not true for everyone. Some need something more. And for that one, we look at the optimizing zone, which is a zone where the teams are not minimally cross-functional, but broadly cross-functional. So the teams have business expertise embedded in the team. They may have sales or marketing expertise embedded in the team. They may have technical writers and, you know, all the perspectives that are going to be needed to put that product in the marketplace. There's not going to be any handoffs. Everything is going to be a part of the team and everything can be done there. So we're cutting down on the wait time. These are a lot of times R&D kinds of teams, or teams that are focused on very innovative products that their company is hoping will be disruptive in the marketplace. So those kinds of things. That requires a different way of thinking about the work entirely. And so that's why we call that an organizational structure shift. There's much more of a market focus because we're going to put different membership in the team than maybe we have before. That may alter the structure. It often means that managers have to start working a lot more cross-functionally than they have been doing before, and various other things. So, and teams have to understand more about the business and be able to speak to, the whole team needs to be able to speak to the rest of the organization in language that the business really understands. So for the most part, you know, that's another few percent of the teams that we see, but we do see that quite a bit in organizations where they want their teams focused on market share. I mean, they are absolutely focused on gaining new market share or those kinds of things. We have one additional zone. We see very few organizations, very few teams working in organizations that want to support this zone, but there are a few out there, and we call that the strengthening zone. And this is where the teams are actually focused on the health of the overall organization, not just their product. In some ways, I think of focusing as being focused story by story, or you know, what the product owner is giving the team in, and delivering can be maybe focused more feature by feature, or MVP by MVP. What's the next one? Optimizing is focused a lot more on whole product, and strengthening is focused on the whole organization. What's going to be the best choice for the whole organization? And so then we need, you know, we see the teams inventing even new agile practices. I think Hunter Industries, where mob programming and ensemble programming was developed, we think of them as potentially being a strengthening team, although they kind of move in and out of their desire to be in that space. Mostly it's smaller organizations that are there. It's not big organizations, because the communication overhead in very large organizations just can't support strengthening zone work. You'll notice that our model kind of, there's another line, like, it's like one of those, you know, we haven't quite built it yet, other zones for the buses to go to, and because we've begun to see in a very, very few cases where team behaviors are all organized around what's best for community or society. And that would be a further zone and a different set of team behaviors, but we don't see enough of it to be able to describe it yet. So most of our focus is in these early zones. The other part of this card here, I just would like to point out to you, is up here in the top left corner. We had some intentions for when we built this model. We wanted to make sure it was a positive model. We're not interested in bashing anybody or in saying anybody's wrong or bad. We wanted it to be something you could aspire to and not need to shy away from. It is inclusive. If you'll notice, we talk about lots of different methodologies here. We think that very many methodologies can fit in any of these spaces. We do see some affinities, like, for instance, since this is a meetup that talks about scaling a lot, we see a lot of interest from organizations that are using SAFe in having their teams be in the focusing zone. They want them to be those solid fundamentals. They don't want necessarily so many of the flashy bells and whistles that might come in other ways, or focusing with some delivering proficiencies, but not really full delivering zone. You know, there may be other examples of how SAFE is being used, but those are the kinds of things that we see. And we wanted it to be a model that was promoted improvement. That was, I mean, that's my whole career. If you think about Agile retrospectives and team chartering and liftoff, I'm mostly about helping teams be as good as they can be and continuous improvement and so on. So we wanted this model to be something that would also support that. Fluency we call routine, skillful ease at a certain skill or knowledge base or proficiency, and we know that that comes from an investment in learning. So so that is, how do I get back now to my PowerPoint? I guess maybe I'll just click. Yep, there we go. So, so that's the basic model. And I just want to run through a couple of other things here before we stop and go into the questions. In addition to, one of the first things that we developed after we did the model was the Agile Fluency Diagnostic, because a lot of folks were asking us, well, how do I know where my teams are now? And so that I can know what investments I need to make, because I don't need to make a whole big package of investments. I just need to take up the slack between where my teams are now and where we need to be able to support them to be in order to get the business benefits that we need. So we developed an Agile Fluency Diagnostic. And then we also developed something we call, and we began working with experienced coaches on how to use the diagnostic. And then we realized that we needed to put that in context. So we created the Agile Fluency Improvement Cycle. And that's what's described here. And if you have questions about that, we can talk more about that sooner, or in a moment. So that's the Agile Fluency suite. These are the three main parts of it. We also have the Agile Fluency game, which isn't in a lot of use right now because it's an in-person sit around a table and play it together kind of game. But that also, it's separate from the suite, but the two things, the Agile Fluency suite and the Agile Fluency game, are very mutually supporting and reinforcing. And then we have some resources, the ebook that you got a link to in the description that came with the meetup description. We have a website that's got lots of different resources on it, a blog. I've got a blog, 3 blog posts on the blog that are about how you focus your retrospective might change depending on what zone your team wants to become fluent in. You would look at different things in your retrospectives. You can contact us if you have questions that don't get answered as a result of this meetup. Jim Shore, if you are familiar with his book, The Art of Agile Development, I've got a typo, is now working on a 2nd edition, and it is in pre-release through O'Reilly. So you can begin to get this book as it's coming out, and it is reframed to talk about Agile development in the context of the Agile Fluency model. So, so that's coming up good. And then we have events and workshops also on our webpage, and you can see those there. So, and then here's a quick, let me stop sharing that, and I'm going to start sharing this. There's a quick picture of the ebook, and you know, we encourage you to check that out as well. It goes into a lot more depth on that very fast run that I just did through the model. It goes into a lot more particulars. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and let's move to questions.
All right. So we've got a few posted in chat, and so
yeah.
Just want to remind others, if you have a question, post in chat and we'll work our way through them. So the first one is around, do you have any examples or names possible of organizations that have optimizing fluency?
Okay, yes. And the model is not a description of organizations. The model is a description of team behaviors. So one organization that I definitely have permission from, a lot of them I don't. So, and a lot of them, our licensed facilitators are working with organizations I don't even know who they are. So, so I don't have access to all that information. But one that I do know about is Spotify. Spotify was a very early adopter of the Agile Fluency model. They even created their own game that they used internally to help teams and their leadership identify where, where they wanted to be and what the gap was for them. And so I kept hearing this, and so I ran into some managers from Spotify a number of years ago. They started pretty soon after we published the article, and which is, gosh, almost 8 years ago now. That's amazing. um, and so I asked them, Anders and Christian, I asked them, so tell me about how you're using the model and with team behaviors at Spotify. And they said, we have some R&D teams that we definitely need them to be optimizing teams. We need them to work fast. We need them to work in response. They absolutely need to understand their customer base just down to the ground so that they can anticipate customer needs and build the products that will satisfy those needs. So we have some optimizing teams. We have more delivering teams because we have a great basic service that we are providing, but we always need to be improving that service, whether it's the service to the artists or the service to the listeners. And so those we have to always be rolling out in response to customer requests. We need to be rolling out new features. And so we have a lot of teams that are delivering teams, and we have a few teams that work with our internal IT and our marketing department that either work on services, internal services that are less time dependent, that that don't need quite such fast action, or marketing teams that where the website's only going to be up for 3 months before we roll out a new marketing initiative. And so the need for some of the more higher level engineering skills and stuff is not as great on those teams. So we have a few focusing teams. So that's why, it's important to remember it's a team model. It's not a organizational model, because depending on what you need from your teams, you may want different teams to be in different zones. And so that's a good thing to remember. And all models are wrong and some are useful. So it's also important to remember that teams very rarely fit just neatly in a zone. They fit in a zone, or they fit in a zone to the extent that we are working to become fluently proficient in this zone. But there are always teams that have, most of what it needs to be proficient in focusing, but have, because of the nature of their product or whatever, may have already dipped into acquiring some of the proficiencies from the delivering zone. So there, it's not as neat as it looks in the model, but it's an easy way to think about it and to begin to think about the team behaviors that you need.
Cool. All right, the next question is about moving from individual compensation to team-based compensation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Do you see any examples of companies doing that as they make the switch as well?
Not as much as I would like. It seems like the organizations that are forward-looking make that move more quickly, whether they're using the Agile Fluency model or not. It just becomes, if organizations are paying attention to the impediments to collaborative behaviors on teams, they're going to be looking at, whether or not there's internal strife in the team. And internal compensation when you're trying to create individual compensation and benefits and promotion and bonuses, when you're trying to create team collaboration, they are just at odds. They are always going to be at odds. I mean, in the 90s, when I was doing work process design with program administration teams in the government, already we were looking at the difficulties when individuals on teams were compensated differently. And already then we were working with HR departments to begin looking at some team compensation possibilities, procedures and things. And so that's been experimented with for a long time. If you've got old people in your HR departments who know about it, there are resources available to them to look at, you know, successful team compensation schemes, and it's a great support. And it also helps to, and then the team can decide how they want to have compensation happen in their team. And it also is a, you know, a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue, right? It ensures that every member of the team is getting the same kinds of benefit, not just what they were able to negotiate when they were hired. So it's a really important question. It's a little bit orthogonal to the Agile Fluency Zone, other than every zone is trying to create healthy teams, healthy team behaviors, and certainly your compensation structure affects whether you have healthy team behaviors or not. So that, I mean, it's not specific to Agile Fluency. It's a much broader question. But I, of course, have an opinion.
The next question is, the CMMI levels tend to be very expensive to achieve and maintain as you transition. What do you see in various fluency zones?
Well, because the fluency zones, I mean, yes, that's true, CMMI. And the Agile Fluency Zones, because they are accumulative, you can't really get full delivering proficiency if you don't already have the focus, or don't also have the focusing proficiencies. You can't get to true optimizing proficiencies if you don't have focusing proficiencies and delivering proficiencies. So in that sense, as you would have noticed in the model graphic I showed you, it takes longer. And so because it takes longer, it seems more expensive. But the nature of the expense is very particular to the organization and to what they want from their team and to what investments they're willing to make. So one of the things I appreciate about the Agile Fluency model when I'm working with leaders is we can talk about the trade-offs. You know, if you really can't afford to bring in full-time coaches, well, what else could you do? And how is that going to affect maybe how long it'll take for you to get fluent proficiency in that? And is there a market share that you're giving up to do that? Or, you know, how do we think about those investment trade-offs, investment versus ROI trade-offs, right? Return. And then we can craft an approach that actually fits the budgetary constraints that an organization has. Oftentimes, what we have noticed is that when organizations realize the degree of return increase that is possible for them, the investments start seeing a lot more affordable. But, you know, if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. So, you know, we also have to look at that. Not every investment is a monetary one, too. I mean, some investments are leaders mentoring other leaders in the organization. I mean, they would be being paid for their work anyway, but now they're doing their mentoring with a different mindset, right? And helping managers become better skilled at managing teams instead of individual contributors. and those kinds of things. I was kind of coach mentoring a CTO one time, and I knew that we were done when he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, the team's in the other room and they're discussing this thing, and I really think they should take a different approach, but I should probably leave them alone, right?" And I said, "Yes, and I think we're done. You know, you've figured it out, right?" So, but my coaching costs a little bit, but his awareness and then what he was able to do with the other managers in his organization to extend his awareness, that cost them nothing. That was work that they were already paying for. So, different investments are going to have different price tags to them. And so it just depends on what the team needs, what the organization needs for their teams, what they can afford, and you work out, something that fits. And then they have to learn to manage their expectations. It's like if you really can't invest in, making sure you have really broadly cross-functional teams, and you're not able to have what we call the social capital in your organization to influence a shift in managers not thinking of themselves in silos, but thinking of themselves laterally as removing impediments for these teams. If you just can't make that happen in your organization, then you really can't expect to have fluently proficient optimizing teams. So what's the best we can do with delivering teams in your organization? So it gives you that opportunity to have those conversations, always based on what the leaders and organizations see as their needs and their affordabilities. So
Okay.
yeah, so I can't say that anything is, I mean, it all is in what the individual coach or facilitator that's using the Agile Fluency model to work with that organization, what kind of compensation they negotiate. One more thing though, what we have found is that when we go into organizations and say, charge a certain amount to do the diagnostic with teams, and so that the organization actually now has a really clear idea of what their teams are capable of and what they're not. And we're not measuring willingness. We are measuring actual, can they actually do? Where are they actually fluent and where are they not fluent? Um, then that also says something about the organization. Like I said, the team is a fractal of the larger organization. And so we work with that as well. So yeah.
All right, next question is, can you say again what percentage of orgs you see in each zone? And
Yeah.
also, can you elaborate a little more on the safe orgs wanting to stay in the
Right.
focus zone?
So this is totally anecdotal. So I want to make sure that I'm clear about that up front. In the early days when Jim and I were going out to conferences and presenting on the model and talking to that, we would always ask the audience, how many of you, we'd ask the question in two ways. We'd say, how many of you feel like your teams are performing in each of these zones? And then we would say, how many of you think your organization needs your teams to be in these zones, right? And what we found over and over again with, Jim and I sometimes speak to conference audiences of, hundreds of people. What we began noticing was that by show of hands, doing quick check of, count of show of hands, that what we would see is that about 40 to 50, so we kind of rounded it into 45. We wanted to be more conservative than aggressive. So about 45% of organizations were saying that focusing zone was either what they had or what they thought they needed. And then we'd get another 25 to 30% that would say delivering zone. And then maybe 15% 10 to 15% that would say optimizing, you know, 2, 3%, 1% that would say they were strengthening, and then a whole bunch that said they were still in pre-agile and that they were comfortable there. So I've given those numbers out over the years, but now that was, 10 years ago or whatever when we collected those kind of numbers of what people said, and we haven't done that lately. So I don't actually know. But when I talk to the folks who are the licensed facilitators, they use our material, people who are licensed to use our materials. When we talk to them about what they are seeing, they are still seeing mostly focusing and delivering zone teams by a long shot. And that optimizing teams tend not to be, I know of one organization who said they wanted almost all of their teams to be optimizing teams. And it was a pretty big organization. It was like 13 to 1500 people. And their product was a software product. So they, most of that was delivery teams of one kind or another. And they wanted all of their external product teams to be optimizing teams. And they're still on the road to that. They started that about 3 years ago, and they're still working in that direction. So, that's those are the numbers I have. In terms of SAFE, so the focusing zone isn't really safe. The focusing zone is a non-trivial shift. It is a big deal to shift from pre-agile into real focusing zone fluency. A lot of teams have struggled with that. So the reason that I say I see SAFE there has been mostly come from SAFE consultants, that in their implementations and where they do both, where they have an Agile Fluency kind of mindset and they know how to think in those terms within where they're working, and they are also SAFE consultants. So there's nothing oppositional there. You can easily do both. Or less, or any of the others. But the difference is in, I think, bureaucracy and just communication overhead and so on. What I see in a lot of SAFE implementations as they are described to me, and I am not a SAFE consultant, so you have to take this with a grain of salt. But when I hear them described, or I talk to people who are doing that, or I hear anecdotally from team members who've been a part of a transition, it seems like getting people to, in that sort of basic Scrum kind of way, to really step up into true collaborative teams that are truly focused on value, that truly know how to work with their product owner or business liaison, as we call it, because they get called different things in different places, and really make that shift and become reliable. Maybe not as predictable as delivering zone teams, but certainly reliable in their production and in what we can expect from them. I hear more of those kinds of team behavior descriptions when I'm hearing people talk about a shift to SAFE. It's huge. It's a huge shift. It is, like I say, non-trivial. So I don't want to downplay it, but that's more what I hear those organizations going for, because the managers are still not willing to give up quite as much control as they might need to give up if they were moving into delivering zone teams. Because in delivering zone teams, the teams need to be making a lot more of their own decisions. And, if you're doing continuous improvement, if you're working with DevOps, in a DevOps kind of way, if you are continuous integration, continuous delivery into an internal production environment, and then continuous deployment out to your customers, the teams need a lot more control in that, of their own work processes in that environment. And a lot of big organization managers aren't ready or able to give up the control that they've had. So if we can get them to just even begin to think about it in terms of managing teamwork instead of managing individuals, that's a huge win. And that's what we're looking for in the focusing zone from those managers. So, so that's, you know, it's all anecdotal. But that's why I say that. It's all the stories that I hear. That may also be true of less and Scrum and Scale and, you know, all the other scaling, because scaling is in general very large companies. I think the reason that Spotify was successful is when they adopted the Agile Fluency model, it's like 2013, you know, they were still pretty small. And when I talked to them, it was maybe 2014, 2015 about where they were. They had not become a worldwide phenomenon quite at that time. So, so the larger the organization, the more difficult it is to move to the other zones. And certainly the strengthening zone, like I said, is generally no more than a few hundred people in the organization. So, you know, the odds of an organization of that size needing SAFe or Scrum at Scale is less. Yeah.
Okay, so
Ha.
when you're moving through the zones, is it very serial? Like, do you get to focusing and move to the next one? Is it truly like a bus, or is there some parallel? Like, we know we want to go to optimizing, and do we?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. What we ask when we're working with leaders is that they choose a target and then they go all in. So if they say we need this group of teams here to be delivering fluent in the delivering zone, we want them to really have mastery there. Then we tell them you have to go all in. Right. And they may develop some of the proficiencies in delivering before they develop some of the proficiencies in focusing. But until other parts of those focusing proficiencies are developed, you're probably not going to get full delivering zone fluency. So, for instance, one of the things we talk about the XP practices a lot in the delivering zone. One of the XP practices is collective coding standards, and you know, collective integration or continuous integration, and doing those kinds of things. If you aren't able to work as a collaborative team, you aren't going to be able to figure out your collective coding standards. Right. So there are some dependencies between. And then again, if you want optimizing zone fluency, you need to have the focusing zone, which we call kind of the foundation or the fundamentals, and delivering zone, and then what the additional things that come with optimizing zone. And that's also why it takes longer, you know, the more zones you're including in your investments. So thank you for that question. Yeah.
All right. So next one is, do you see a correlation between where orgs are in the fluency model and where organizations are in the LUL culture model?
You know, again, it's a model of team behavior. It's not a model of organizations. And I get this question a lot. And I think it's because we, you know, those of us who are Agile coaches, we love this organizational stuff, and we want to see every organization be high performing, and you know, um, and so we want that. The dirty secret is that we need a lot of coaching in the focusing zone. We need a lot of coaching or mentoring and potentially technical training in the delivering zone. By the time teams can be fully proficient in the optimizing zone, they may not need as much coaching. And certainly in strengthening, there's so much internal knowledge in those teams about complexity and all these other things that, you know, if they've got one coach in their whole organization, that may be enough. So that's the difficult, the downside of this whole thing. But in terms of LUL, I just think it's orthogonal. We're talking about whether or not an organization can support focusing zone teams or whether they can support delivering zone teams. But we don't have a fluency model for organizations. The LUL model may be that. I don't know what process they used to get there. The LUL model feels more like it has implications of a maturity model in it. And like, some zones are better, just inherently better, or some places, some colors are inherently better than other colors. And we're not saying that. We're saying get the proficiency, the team proficiency that you need for what you're trying to accomplish, and you don't need the rest of it. So there's some real differences in how we think about things. So I think the LUL model is fine. It just doesn't. It's just kind of orthogonal. I don't even know if orthogonal is the right way to describe it. They're just two different descriptions of two different things. Not every model can overlay on all the other models, right? And so I'm just not sure there's a much there. I haven't really looked at it. I haven't looked to see if I think an orange zone organization could support any of the Agile Fluency zones. Maybe they're just pre-Agile. I don't know.
All right, and this will probably be our last question is, do you see larger organizations, 5,000 plus people, getting broad adoption of delivering zone where it's the norm? And do they require some kind of scaling framework to do that?
No. Well, I mean, no, in the sense that I don't personally know about a lot. I don't like working with organizations of that size. So I leave that to other licensed facilitators who enjoy working in big organizations that way. I do know that there's one of our colleagues is very active in a very large, internationally large financial institution. Well, actually, we have a number of facilitators working in different financial institutions, but this particular one, that's what they have been working on, is getting their teams. But the way they were going about it is more, they're so big that they don't have one IT organization, right? They've got divisions, and each division has their own IT organization and so on. So, and so they've accomplished that in a couple of the divisions. And I have just been talking to them about a third division where they want to begin to do some things differently. They hadn't done that before, but we're starting with just getting chartering done for their teams. And then we'll go on to look at some of these other issues. But, we're still at the, and chartering will help with focusing zone fluency, but we're not doing it under that umbrella yet. Pretty much everything I do now with organizations, I kind of have a sense of what zone this is going to help them in, just for my own purposes, and what other things might align with that. But yeah, it's, I know of folks who are using the Agile Fluency model in very large organizations, absolutely, but they tend to do it more piece by piece as opposed to across the boards. And I think that's a lot how all the models are being used. There's a lot of folks who say, get whatever Agile you want, whether it's Scrum or Kanban or whatever you're taking on. Get that going in a couple of teams before you start trying to scale. Know how to do it in at least one instance before you start trying to make it in many more instances. And I think there's some wisdom to that. But again, I have in the past worked in very, very large international organizations as clients, and I almost invariably end up firing them as a client because I just step away. I don't re-up my contract or whatever, because it's so hard to see a path to success. And I like to take on things where I can see a path to success. So I tend to work in more mid-sized and smaller organizations. So for what that's worth, that's just my experience and my preference. So.
All right. Well, with that, we're at time. So I want to thank you for doing this. Enjoyed it. Learned some good stuff in here today.
Yeah.
So hope everyone else did. Yeah, people are posting. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Those kind of things. Any last minute plug? Anything you got coming up you want to plug?
Well, I want to go back to this. There's, if you want to take a screenshot of this, I can also make the I can make the slides available to you if you want them. Just write to me at that contact us and I'll send you the slides. Or if you want just a separate PDF of the big model graphic, I'm happy to send you that. And of course the ebook is free. You can download that. So those are some kind of bonus stuff that you can get. And we do have workshops. Our next series of licensed facilitator workshops are coming up in November and December. So those, you can sign up for those, at least the November ones now on our website. So.
Okay. Or could you send me the PDFs and then I could just post them in the meeting notes?
I'll send you the slide PDFs.
Yeah.
I'd prefer that if people want the graphics or
Okay.
other specific things, they just write to us.
Okay,
Yeah.
that works for
Yeah.
me as well.
Sure.
All
And
right.
also we offer half-hour just conversations. If anybody has more intense questions, if you write to that contact us page, there's a box there where you can put in a question and just say request that you want to have half an hour with me to talk about your concerns or your questions or whatever it might be, and we set those up all the time. So I'm always open to doing that.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, and really enjoyed this one today.
Well, thank you. Good. I'm gonna save the chat because I like having
I'm gonna
those
stop
nice
recording.
compliments to look at on the bad days.